Welcome to This Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today, mostly because we are tackling a fascinating topic that affects literally every single interaction we have. Today, we're digging into the informal cultural labels of strong and weak personalities. I mean, we throw these terms around all the time, right? But what do they actually mean from a hard psychological standpoint? How do they silently dictate the way we work, the way we sell, and even the way we love? Well, we are going to break all of the whole shebang down to really grasp these concepts and see exactly how they play out in our daily lives.
So I want you to genuinely self-reflect for a second. Do you consider yourself to have a strong personality? Or do you maybe lean a little more toward a weaker, more passive style? Now, right off the bat, I want to remind you that in the realm of psychology, these terms are absolutely not moral judgments. Strong doesn't inherently mean good, and weak definitely doesn't mean that. They're really just clusters of psychological traits that dictate how we navigate the world around us.
Okay, let's quickly look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll define strong and weak. Second, we'll see where these traits originate. Third, we'll navigate work and sales. Fourth, we'll look at dynamics in romantic relationships. And finally, we'll cover practical steps to build assertiveness.
All right, jumping into section 1, defining strong and weak. Let's look at the actual science behind these personality types.
A massive piece of this puzzle actually comes down to what's called your locus of control. Psychological science maps our informal labels right onto established models like this. See, strong personalities typically have an internal locus of control. They walk into a room believing, hey, I make things happen. My actions shape the outcome. Weaker personality types tend to operate with a more external locus. They often feel like luck or other people or just outside forces in general dictate events. And you can probably imagine how deeply that affects how assertive someone is willing to be.
And that feeds directly into our next definition, self-efficacy. Basically, this is your underlying belief in your own capability to succeed. Strong types, they have super high self-efficacy. They view challenges as entirely manageable. They see an obstacle and think, okay, that's just a bump in the road to overcome. Weaker types, who might be suffering from lower self-efficacy, tend to immediately focus on their own limitations and might just try to avoid the challenge altogether.
This really brilliantly illustrates the core differences when we compare these two cognitive mindsets side by side. The strong personality is confident, assertive, goal-driven, emotionally stable, and often exhibits that very competitive type A behavior. They are highly decisive. The weak personality, on the other hand, is reserved, accommodating, cautious, people-pleasing, and deferential. And again, maintaining our completely neutral lens here. The strong type gets things done, but, they can be overly intense. The weak type is highly cooperative and harmonious, but they might completely fail to protect their own needs.
So let's do a really quick self-assessment. I want you to mentally tick off your own tendencies as we go through this checklist. Do you often say yes when you actually desperately want to refuse? Do you avoid giving your opinions in a group just to keep the peace? Do you find it hard to say no to favors? Do you feel uneasy asserting your needs, maybe worrying you'll upset someone or come off as selfish? And crucially, do you sometimes feel resentful specifically because you stayed silent? The more of these you tick, the more you naturally lean toward a passive, accommodating style. Moving right along to section 2, where do traits originate? Let's explore how these personality styles actually develop. Think about the psychosocial timeline of your own life for a minute. Personality styles are absolutely not fixed genetic destinies. In early childhood, secure attachment and parents who support autonomy really foster confidence, while overly critical parenting can foster dependence. Then, as we grow, the psychologist Albert Bandura points out that mastery experiences, think of successfully learning to ride a bike or speaking in public, those strongly reinforce our self-efficacy. We also rely heavily on social modeling. Observing assertive mentors encourages us to act exactly the same way. And finally, you cannot ignore present-day situational factors. Even a typically strong person might act weak and just stay completely silent in an unfamiliar or threatening work environment. Context absolutely matters.
Let's see how this builds as we move into section 3, navigating work and sales. How do these traits play out in the office?
Let's look at a real-world example. Picture Maria and Ian. Maria is this incredibly strong-willed project lead who pushes really hard to meet deadlines. She takes charge. Ian is her soft-spoken, highly detail-oriented colleague. Now, when a technical problem popped up recently, Ian actually noticed a much better alternative, but he waited to be asked. Maria, who was moving 1,000,000 miles a minute, never heard it, and took the project in a totally different direction. Maria accidentally steamrolled Ian. Not out of malice, but simply because her intense drive completely overshadowed his quiet caution.
Breaking down these workplace profiles, we see it plain as day. Strong personalities are decisive leaders with high productivity, but their massive weakness is dominating meetings and overlooking other people's ideas. They literally need structured turn-taking to ensure everyone speaks. Weak personalities, they are amazing listeners and implementers who maintain team harmony, but their weakness is deferring way too readily and letting their own concerns go unvoiced. Managers absolutely need to actively mentor these individuals and explicitly invite their opinions by asking directly, "Hey, what's your take on this?"
So, what happens when things get heated? When a conflict inevitably arises between these totally different styles, how should a manager respond? Because I'll tell you right now, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. The approach has to be tailored. If you're dealing with a strong personality in a conflict, you've got to stay calm, clarify your own view, firmly but respectfully, and then directly invite their solution ideas. You have to give them that autonomy. But if you're managing a weaker, passive style in a conflict, you need to completely switch gears. Ask open questions like, how do you feel about this? Validate their perspective so they feel genuinely safe, and gently encourage them to suggest options. Both paths lead to compromise, but the vehicle you use to get there is entirely different.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how this totally shatters a massive cultural myth in the sales world. We almost always think the fast-talking, extreme extrovert is the ultimate salesperson, right? But researcher Adam Grant actually proved that ambiverts, people who are moderately extroverted, sitting comfortably right in the middle, they actually outperform extreme extroverts. Take our source vignette of Aaron and Claire. Aaron was highly extroverted but dominated conversations, making his clients feel talked over. Claire was quiet and empathetic, but shied away from actually asking for the sale. They both had to adjust toward the middle to find real success.
Notice how these sales strategies completely contrast. Strong types have that charm, they think on their feet, but they completely miss social cues. Their biggest interaction tip? They must learn active listening. They literally have to force themselves to pause and ask, how does that sound to you? Weak types build incredible rapport through patience and empathy, but they risk sounding unsure. Their tip? They benefit hugely from checklists and prepared scripts to confidently assert the product's value.
All right, section 4, dynamics in romantic relationships. How do these dynamics affect us when we go from the boardroom to the living room? Relationship researchers, like the folks over at the Gottman Institute, emphasize one absolute core truth. Intimacy thrives when each partner feels heard. If a strong partner dominates the boundaries without checking in, the weaker, passive partner will just retreat to maintain the peace. And sure, on the surface, it looks harmonious, but underneath, it is breeding deep, hidden resentment. The goal is always assertive but respectful communication from both sides. When we look really closely at these couple dynamics, strong partners express feelings directly, which is great. But in conflict, they need what Gottman calls a softened startup. They need to avoid bulldozing the conversation and instead try starting with, I felt hurt when. Weak partners who normally avoid setting any limits must practice self-expression in calm, neutral moments. They need to learn to voice personal boundaries by clearly saying, I'm not comfortable with. True intimacy requires the assertive partner to consciously invite input and the reserved partner to bravely share their preferences.
And finally, Section 5, Steps to Build Assertiveness. Here is your practical toolkit to cultivate a really healthy balance. So, if you lean a little too far toward the passive side, this consolidated 6-step intervention is your game plan to build confidence. First, keep a journal to reflect on times you held back and clarify to yourself that, yes, you have a right to your own needs. Second, plan and rehearse using I statements, like, I would prefer. Third, physically adopt confident, open body language. Seriously, make eye contact. Fourth, start small. Pick a low-stakes mastery experience, like just choosing the restaurant for dinner, to build that self-efficacy up. Fifth, seek feedback from a trusted friend and challenge those pesky self-critical thoughts. And finally, reflect and celebrate your progress. Every single small win builds lasting confidence. If you take away just one single thing from this entire explainer today, let it be this. True assertiveness is the highly effective, respectful middle ground between aggression and submission. By balancing our natural traits, whether that's smoothing out our aggressive edges or building up our passive voices, we achieve the absolute best outcomes in our careers, our sales, and our love lives. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative challenge to take into the rest of your day. What is one situation today where you can shift your balance? Where do you need to bravely speak up, or where do you need to intentionally step back and really listen? Apply this toolkit right now. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.